Hello friends, a very good morning. Today we have with us Master Saroja Gullapalli from Australia. She'll be taking today she'll be taking about ego mind. It's very important to understand about the ego mind because understanding the ego mind and understanding the science behind is very important, my dear friends. Because if we have the ego, we always self-judge ourselves, self-criticize ourselves, and we also judge others. We should always be aware of our ego. And today we are very grateful to Master Saroja Gullapalli for taking this wonderful wisdom sharing session to all the UK people. Thank you so much, ma'am, for accepting our request. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Shri.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good evening, and good day to all the people who have taken the time and joined in today's workshop. While we start, I'm still seeing there are people just joining us. So Shri has already given a great introduction of the workshop as well as the big objective behind this topic. I would kindly request all to just close your eyes just for a minute or two. This topic is very complex, though the word sounds very simple. So it would really help us if we all close our eyes, interlock our fingers, and just focus on your breath just for 1 or 2 minutes before I kick into this workshop. Once you're aligned with yourself, whatever we talk will go into our being in no time. So my dear friends, as I prepare to share my slides, I would request you all to gently close your eyes, interlock your fingers, cross your feet, and focus on your breath as I take a minute or two before I kick off this workshop. Gently focus on your breath. Another minute. Keep your eyes closed for another couple of seconds. And be with your breath. All right, my dear friends, gently rub your palms and place them on your closed eyes before you open up your eyes. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Remove your palms. You may open your eyes gently. So welcome to all from Saroja Gullapalli from Melbourne, Australia this evening. It's 5 p.m. Melbourne time. So that you people are aware, this workshop from my side will go for 2 hours. After that, if anyone has any question answers, I'm more than happy to take it. The first session of Ego Mind workshop was conducted 2 weeks ago, and it was more for the US time zone. We had a great session. We had a wonderful session. The participants had such great questions, and it really made me thinking. And I was so blessed to have that group around 2 weeks back. And thanks to Shri for, again, with this request that why don't we have this Ego Mind workshop for UK time zone. And as you all know, for me, no matter how many times I would have done this workshop, but for me, I feel like every time I talk about these kind of topics, it just brings us closer to our being one more step every time. So I never get tired of these discussions and sharing or learning wisdom from you guys or sharing wisdom with you people. Ego Mind. Yeah, I think it's a good time for us to remind as people join us that please mute your microphones. Of course, I've got a very great host, Shri, who
Madam, could you please unmute your microphone because I muted everyone.
Okay. Yeah, so just to help Shri, as I was saying, make sure that your phones are muted at all times. Otherwise, Shri will have to keep on going and muting microphones, which means she will mute my microphone too, and then every time I'll have to keep unmuting. So if you want to make the most of this session, the least you all can do is to make sure that your microphones are muted until I finish this talking. After that, in the question answer session, everyone will have a chance to unmute their microphone, and we'll have a great chance to really share what we have either on this topic or any other questions we feel are related to this topic. Ego mind, wonderful topic, but even before I enter this ego mind session, as I go through through the participants list, I don't think there are any new participants that I'm not aware of, but who knows, that one or two people who have joined this for the first time. So welcome you guys to the self-empowerment online workshop series. So as I say every time, we started off this 2019 online self-empowerment workshop series on 5th January 2019. And since then, we have been covering amazing topics one after another. We have never taken rest, and it's been great. The participants on these platforms have really kept me going and thinking all the time. Just before we kicked into this Ego Mind workshop, the previous month, normally we like to take one topic every month. And the topic last month that I had covered was karma, what goes around comes around. And that topic really went more than a month because karma workshop in itself is a very intriguing one, and it really makes you thinking. I know I still have to do it for UK people, but we'll do it the following month. But the reason I'm telling this is this Ego Mind workshop request came out of the Karma workshop. They're very interrelated, and one would wonder how, and that's how we'll start the topic today. But for people who do not know me, I'm Saroja Gullapalli, and as you see, there's a little bit about me on this slide. And I've been holding this self-empowerment workshops for last over 11 or 12 years in Australia and abroad. And as you can read from the slide, a little bit about me and my community work.
Madam, your microphone is muted. I don't know. Could you please unmute?
Can you hear me, Shri?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, please let me know if my microphone gets muted. I'm not sure what's happening, but we'll try to make sure there's no technology glitch as we go through. So as I was saying in my last slide, as part of my community work, I do holistic living workshops, self-empowerment workshops. I do counseling one-on-one, face-to-face, over the phone. And recently I have had my own Facebook page, which is called Saroja Self-Empowerment Platform. So anyone who is interested in knowing the activities that's going around, Or if you want to know what's the next online workshop, when is it planned, and in what time zone it's planned, feel free to visit my Facebook page and you'll have all the information there. Self-empowerment, as the word stands, it is one of my effort to understand the capability and the true nature of a human being, and we being one, to understand what's our true capability and to understand what's the limit of being a human being. I don't think we really fully utilize our full potential. And through these workshops, we are trying to cover one topic after another, one step after another, trying to get closer to who we truly are. So with that, I'm not going to spend any more time on who I am because most of you know. So one question for us to ask is, what keeps us away from the present moment? We have talked about present moment a lot in the last 7 months. Since the time I've started my online workshop, the first topic that we had was how and where to seek happiness. And when we had this 3-hour discussion about the simple word happiness, at the end, we kind of reached to an agreement that one of the ways to be close to happiness is to live in the present moment. And as part of multiple workshops, explore our divine nature, holistic living, and who are we as a complete human being. We have talked about different ways on how to keep, close to present moment. Now the question that I'm posing is, yes, we know we need to be in the present moment because that's where the life exists. That's where the life is, in the present moment. But what is that's keeping us away from the present moment? And this is the answer, my dear friends. One of the key things that is keeping us away from the present moment is ego and ego mind. So today we are going to talk in detail about what games does this ego and ego mind plays within our being, and we're going to go step by step. Like every workshop, I want to address this very technically and scientifically so that we understand where is it coming from, why we are not aware of it, and if we are aware of it, why we're not even knowing about it and not doing anything about it. So with that kind of a little bit of introduction on ego mind, let's look at what are the things that we're going to cover today in this workshop. So this workshop's main purpose is not to add any new information or beliefs to your mind. I'm not here to convince you of anything, but to bring about a shift in your consciousness. We all know what's consciousness. We all know that we have that awareness within us that's watching everything, or that's witnessing everything that's going within or without in this universe. So I believe through this workshop, we can bring a shift in our consciousness. That is to say, to awaken. So when I'm talking about shift in consciousness, what do I mean? I will be making an effort to move a step towards to awaken ourselves. This workshop is about you. This will change your state of consciousness. Otherwise, this will be meaningless. This can only awaken because I said I'm going to bring a shift in consciousness through this workshop, which I said it meant I will try to awaken you one more step. But having said that, what I want to say here is we can only awaken those who are ready. Not everyone is ready yet, but many of us are. The reason that we are all here today in this workshop is we are those people who have taken upon ourselves that we are ready to be awakened, ready to bring that shift in our consciousness. And with each person who awakens, the momentum in the collective consciousness grows. We're all part of that collective consciousness. So whenever there's a shift in our individual consciousness, that brings the momentum in the collective consciousness and the whole thing grows. So we're not separate. We are part of that big whole. And that's how we help each other. Only by awakening can we know the true meaning of that word. What is awakening? So how do you know that you have awakened? Only after you have awakened, by that feel or by that awareness. A glimpse is enough to initiate the awakening process. And this is irreversible. Once it has happened, you cannot go back. We have talked about this many, many times. For some people, that glimpse would have already started some time back, but we are not aware. An essential part of that awakening is the recognition of the unawakened you. These words are very tricky, but I've put together these words very carefully. So how do you know, or how do you awaken yourself? So essential part of awakening is the recognition that you have that part within you that is unawakened, which needs to be awakened now. And that's where the word ego comes. And what's the part that we are trying to awaken today is the part that's called ego, as it thinks, as it speaks, and not only thinking and speaking. I always say where there is thoughts, where there are words, there is action too. That's why this workshop shows the main aspects of the ego and how it's operating in all of us individually and collectively. Why is it important? Why this workshop is important? What do we need to know? There are two main aspects. The first is that unless you know the basic mechanics behind the working of the ego, you won't recognize it. And it will trick you into identifying with it again and again and again. I'm going to take through each of these words in detail, but just to make you know what are we going to cover today in this workshop, there are two important parts which I just mentioned. So one is the basic mechanics behind how the ego works. So if you don't recognize, it will trick you into identifying with it. What does it mean? This means that it takes you over like an imposter. Imposter is like a thief pretending to be you. So you think you are the ego, you think you are the ego mind, so you don't find anything wrong with yourself because we identify ourselves with that ego. And what's the second reason or the second aspect is the act of recognition itself in the way the awakening happens. So that is itself coming out of the ego. So when you recognize the unconsciousness in you, that which makes the recognition possible, that is what is awakening. You cannot fight against the ego. There is no fighting and winning against the ego, just as you cannot fight against the darkness. So how do you get out of the darkness? You get out of the darkness by bringing the light. And that's exactly how we can combat the ego. How? The light of consciousness is what's required here. And my dear friends, where is the light? You are that light. So the first part is you have to be aware of it. And second part is when you are aware of it, that's automatically the time when you start awakening. So once you know that the ego exists, it's very easy to come out of it. So we're going to talk about how to combat ego and all that parts. But just to bring that connection with what we have been talking right from the beginning of this year, I had two important workshops going on earlier this year. One was Explore Your Divine Nature. I don't know how many of you still remember what we discussed in Explore Your Divine Nature. In Explore Your Divine Nature, I kind of brought 4 aspects. If you remember, we talked about love. Second one out of the 4 aspects when we were talking about the divine nature was health and well-being. When we were talking about health and well-being, one of the things we discussed was how do we get back our health and well-being? And one of the ways is forgiveness. I don't know how many of you remember, we talked about forgiveness. I'm not going to go through that now because we do not have time to talk about the past workshop. But just as a reminder, we talked about forgiveness as one of the tools and techniques through which we can get our health and well-being. While we talked about that, we talked about how difficult it is to forgive, though it sounds so simple. And we did talk about many examples and the things that we need to be reminding ourselves to practice the art of forgiveness. Not only that, I know you UK guys haven't had your karma workshop, but for the other time zones, when we did the karma workshop, we did talk about one of the ways of coming out of the cycle of birth and death. So what is this cycle of birth and death? The cycle of birth and death exists because of your karma. The cycle of birth and death exists because of the unbalanced emotional energies that exist in your evolution because of your karma. So when we will discuss about karma again for the UK people, and for those who have already done, you would remember we discussed that if you have to get out of the cycle of birth and death, or to come out of this unbalanced emotional energy of karma, one of the biggest tools you have is to practice forgiveness. So why am I bringing that forgiveness aspects from the last 2 workshops? Because, my dear friends, though the word forgiveness seems very, very simple, you know, forgive yourself and forgive others. But we know when we practice that, one of the things that comes in the way is this ego and the ego mind. That's the relation between forgiveness and ego mind, and that's the reason why I'm again referring today. Ego plays havoc. Ego doesn't want you to bend. Ego doesn't even want you to accept that, you know, okay, let go. That let go word is not there in ego's dictionary. So when let go is not there in the ego's dictionary, there is no way that you can even think about forgiveness. So as I always mentioned, I mentioned in the last workshop as well, one of the workshop participants who is happy for me to talk about her example in the workshop, with her due permission. Her name is Divya from the US, and I have a lot of regards for this master. She had been working very hard to fight with the so-called physical illness called psoriasis. If you know, most of you people, psoriasis is a skin kind of a rash kind of a thing that's causes a lot of discomfort. And as she was traveling with me along this self-empowerment online workshops, we used to have a lot of one-on-one discussions. So we've been talking for the last year or so between me and Divya. And when we were talking about forgiveness in both our workshop sessions, Explore Our Divine Nature and the Karma workshop, and when she realized that there is some unbalanced emotional energy still left in her being, which she may be able to get rid through forgiveness, and she started practicing the forgiveness act, one of the greatest things that she shared with me is, in her journey through workshops and meditation, she realized what was that was bringing her this discomfort of psoriasis. And she told to me, she talked to me and she said, Madam, I do understand where is this coming from, but I do want to ask for forgiveness, but my ego will not let me do it. I do not want to go through much more details about her example, but this is the relevant part of it. And this is what she talked to me. She said, I do understand. I have analyzed everything. It's so crystal clear in front of me. But what I have realized is my ego will not let me ask for forgiveness. Ultimately, she did. She managed. And through her practice of forgiveness, today she has got over 90 or 99% of her psoriasis, something she had been struggling for 20 years. Through her practice of forgiveness in 2 months or maybe 3-4 months time, and through her understanding of karma in another 4 months, today she's managed to get over her psoriasis. And it's such a great example that I commend Divya for her strength, for her honesty, for her sharing, and also acknowledging that how difficult it is to forgive and what comes in the path. And she was so open, saying, Madam, my ego will not let me ask for forgiveness. So that was the day when I decided that I am going to pick this topic, ego and ego mind, for our online workshop, because this is one thing that will come in the way of our self-empowered masters when we want to move forward in our journey. So through the workshop objectives, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring all those aspects as what is the objective, why are we doing this ego mind workshop today? So one of the things with the ego and the ego mind is we derive our identity from the ego. You know, our sense of thinking, we take that ego to be ourselves. So there is this voice in our head, which I will be talking about in a minute. Once you understand what is the ego and the ego mind, you will realize that you are not that voice in your head. Till that point of time, we keep thinking that we are that voice in our head, but we are not. Who we are is that one who recognizes that voice in our head, that awareness that is prior to that thought, the space in which all thought arises. It's very important to segregate between who you are and what the ego mind is. Because one of the problems of ego is you identify with the form, and I'm going to go through this in great detail because this is a topic that we will be talking about in as much detail as possible. So underneath the surface appearance, so what surface appearance we are talking about? Underneath who we look like, underneath the surface experience, everything, when I say everything, we all and everything that we see around us is not only connected with everything else, but is also connected to the source of all the life out of which we have all come from. So there is this big connectedness. Even a stone, a flower, a bird, they could show you a way back to the source from which we have all come from. When you look at something, whatever it may be, a table, a paper, a chair, whatever there is, when you look at an object without imposing a word or mental label to it, you know, there'll be a sense of wonder that arises within you. Our problem is we have given a name to everything. For example, I'm looking at my laptop, and when I open it up, one word that comes into my mind is laptop. The moment that word laptop comes into my mind, I do not think anything more than that, because to me, everything about laptop stops with the word laptop. My dear friends, this is very interesting thing. As I'm speaking to you, start thinking. You look at a rose flower, and the moment you look at it, the word immediately comes into your mind, rose. That's all. You won't think anything more than that. But if you have had a flower which you have never seen before, you do not have a name, you see how your being reacts. You will be just looking at the flower and be communicating to it, because there is no word jargon or mental label that is stopping you from labeling that flower or stopping you from going further. Anything that you see, and you can extrapolate that to even people. So if I have my friend coming from front, when I look at her, and if I say Manoja, that's all. My thinking or my awareness about Manoja will stop the moment the word Manoja comes into my mind. So what I'm trying to say, my dear friends, words are good. We will talk about words and mental labels. But here, with respect to ego mind, when we look at something without imposing a word or mental label, there is a sense of wonder that arises within you, and you are looking with wonder at this creation, and you're looking at the essence of that object which is silently communicating to you, and you reflect your essence back to it. So there is an exchange of essence between that object and you, which does not happen when you have a mental label or a word for that object. My dear friends, when I was pondering on this, I could not believe how true it is. I want to give an example. There is this, I wouldn't say story, but this is an instance about a great artist, and his name, he's called Van Gogh. And when he wanted to paint a chair, it was a very old chair. When he looked at the chair to start painting it, he did not say this is just an old chair. He did not put any mental words or mental labels to it. He looked at the chair as if he was looking for the first time. He looked and looked. What was he looking at? He was communicating with the chair and its essence. He was not getting lost with the word chair, because the moment the word chair comes, his ego will come up and it will say, yep, I know everything about the chair. And ego will not make us go anything more than the surface layer. But Van Gogh made it a point to not bring any mental label, and he kept just looking at this chair, just looking and looking. He sensed the beingness of the chair. Every object has an essence, and yet it has a beingness. That's why I started saying we're all connected. We're all connected with within ourselves and with the source, and so is every object. So then he sat in front of the chair, front of the canvas, and he took up the brush in his hands. After looking at this chair for God knows how many days, just trying to grasp its essence, when he drew or painted this chair, my dear friends, the actual chair would have only been sold for maybe $20, $30. But the painting of that same chair today would fetch in excess of $25 million. Can you believe it? One would say, what's such a big deal about an old chair? Because what Van Gogh did, he went beyond words and labels and tried to connect to the beingness of the chair. So when he drew the chair, what he could portray on the canvas was beyond that what words could describe. So as we go much further into this workshop, we will talk about words, we will talk about labels, we will talk about how things work on this foreground of ego mind. So words, they reduce reality to something the human mind can grasp. So why do we have words? Because when we have words, then it brings down the essence of everything to something to our level, to our human mind level. See, we all have a mind which we use for thinking. And unless we bring everything to that level, our mind cannot engage. So humanity, for the sake of our own functioning, day-to-day survival, we have reduced everything to words, something that human mind can relate, which isn't very much. That's the problem. Language consists of what? Language consists of five basic, we all know, five basic vowels, A, E, I, O, U. They are the sounds produced by vocal cords. And then we have those consonants, which are nothing but they are produced by the air pressure, like so apart from the five vowels, the other consonants are just air pressure. That's what is creating the sound. So do you believe some combination of just basic sounds could ever explain who you are or what the ultimate purpose of the universe is. So, my dear friends, I want you to start this workshop by starting thinking that how words have brought down the essence. Words have a purpose, but in our effort to bring everything down to something that human mind can relate to, we are now trying to understand the whole essence of universe through words, and that is where the human race is struggling, because not everything can be really brought down to a couple of words. That's the main problem. We might want to bring down everything to just a couple of words, but not everything can be brought down to those 5 vowels and whatever number 27 consonants are. So, my dear friends, that is what we are going to see in this workshop today. And before we close this workshop, I'm not just going to throw the curly one, this is ego mind, but we're also going to talk about, yes, we understand what is ego and ego mind, how is it playing havoc in our lives, and also how do we combat it. So what do I mean by when I say how do we combat it? Combating means how do we get over it, or how do we bring ourselves out of the grip of the ego and function. So that's quite important. So as we move to the next slide, let's start trying to see what this ego and ego mind is. So most people, they are so completely identified with the voice in the head. As I'm talking to you, each one of you can relate. There is always this voice in the head that's talking to us, whether we need it or we don't need it. Sometimes it's so annoying that at night, when you're trying to sleep, this little voice in the head will not let you sleep. So that's the voice that I'm talking about. Each one of us has that voice in the head. So that's the voice I'm talking about now. We have so completely identified with the voice in our head that the non-stop stream, and what's that stream? It's the involuntary and the compulsive thinking and the emotions that come along with the thinking. So we are so used to this involuntary. There is this thinking going on in our mind which is beyond our control. We human beings have lost it. We cannot control it. It is going non-stop. It's involuntary. It's compulsive. And it's just not thinking, because my dear friends, we know every thought is associated with emotions. So now this story is, it's along with the emotions that comes with it, that we may describe them as being possessed by their mind. And when you look at someone, sometimes some people have this voice so much in their head that they can't contain it within their head, and they start talking aloud. Have you seen people on the street? Sometimes they're talking and walking, there's nobody around them, but they're still talking. What do you think it is? It is that voice in the head that they cannot now control or contain within their head, and now they're having the conversation even verbally with that voice. So the voice says, you're getting late, you're not going to reach there by time. So you'll tell the voice, no, that's fine, we'll do it. And the voice will say something else. It is a monologue that you're having with your own self. And my dear friends, when it happens to a point that you have no control, that is where some of us are taken to so-called mental asylums. I'm not joking, my dear friends. Everything, when it goes beyond a point, that's where the normality comes into picture. And what I'm saying is not untrue. We see so many people talking aloud to themselves. And where is that coming from? That is the voice in your head. As long as you are completely unaware of this voice in your head, you take the thinker to be as you. If you're not aware of who that voice is, and most of us are living in that mode, we don't know, we're not aware where that voice is coming from, and hence we think we are that voice. So the so-called you and I, we think we are that voice. So we are thinking that we are that non-stop chatter that goes in our mind. That's what we truly are. But my dear friends, this is not who you are. This is the egoic mind. Why do we call it egoic? Because There is a sense of self in every thought there. There is a I. Ego starts with the letter I, with the word I. In every thought, in every memory, every interpretation, your reaction, your emotion, there will be this word I. Every thought will be about yourself. And what else it is? It is unconscious. It's very important to understand this egoic mind. What did I say are the characteristics of ego mind? There is a sense of self, I, in every thought, every emotion, every reaction. And also this is unconscious. Very important to understand. That's why I put it on the slide here so clearly. Characteristics of ego mind. It's unconscious. So when we know what is conscious and unconscious, when you talk about spiritual thinking, when we call about self-empowerment thinking, we always ask ourselves to be aware, aware, aware. And this is unconscious. So if this egoic mind or egoic mind-led thoughts are so unconscious in nature. Your thinking, the content of your mind is conditioned by the past. So what is the third characteristic of your ego mind? It is every content in your thought is conditioned by the past. Very important to remember that. And what is past? Past is nothing but your upbringing, the culture in which you have been brought up, your background. And sometimes it also goes back into multiple lifetimes. That also becomes part of your past. The central core of all your mind and activity, it consists of certain repetitive thoughts. So when you are going through this ego mind, you will see that things are, continuous repetition. Same thoughts are repeating again and again. Same emotions are repeating again and again. The patterns are so reactive patterns that you are identifying with them so strongly. You think that's what you are. And this entity or this thinking pattern is the ego itself. So, my dear friends, that's why I've put it in italics here very clearly, that most people are so completely identified with the voice in the head, the non-stop stream of involuntary and compulsive thinking, and all the emotions that are accompanying that. As long as you are unaware of it, that you do not know it's happening, you are thinking you are that. And this is what the egoic mind is. I'm repeating again, my dear friends, what is egoic mind? This is how the ego mind is behaving within each of us. And I also told you three important things, which are the characteristics. Sense of self, which is I. In every thought, every emotion, there is I. It's all I oriented. And the nature is unconscious. You're so unconscious that it's even going on in your mind. And whatever you're thinking of is conditioned by the past. And I clearly said what past is. Past is your upbringing, your background, whatever situations you have been projected to, either in this life or maybe a couple of lives back. I won't even drag it to a couple of lives back. Let us keep for simplicity this life. So this ego mind, it's twofold. So what does twofold mean? That means it's got two important parts. What are the two parts of the ego mind? One is the content. My dear friends, this slide is very important, and that's why I'm kind of taking time to discuss this with you, because by the time we finish this slide, we should be able to identify whenever this ego mind comes up in us. So it's got two parts. One is content and the other part is structure. So the content of the ego varies from person to person. But in every ego, structure is the same. So what I'm saying is the two parts, content and structure, the content may be different. My content may be different to yours. But the structure, which I will explain in a moment, is just the same in every human being. So the ego, it only differs on the surface. Deep down, so deep down what's happening? It's all the same. Excuse me. So this ego and the ego mind, it lives on identification and separation. We're going to talk about in detail. So I'm just throwing one word at a time just to make you understand how this ego mind operates. So two important things that it lives on is identification and separation. So when you live through the mind-made thoughts that I was talking about, the ego mind, which has thought and which has emotions that comes with it, the basis for your identity, that becomes your basis for identity, because you are trying to relate that you are that, because thoughts and emotions, they are all fleeting all the time. The problem is thoughts are never stable. Thoughts come and go, and so do the emotions. So the most important part is, when we are talking about this ego, one of the things that we see in ego is, every time we talk about ego, the egoic mind, as I said, is completely conditioned by the past. If I give you an example, in case of a child, so let's take an example, in a little one, a child. So a child who is crying or he's suffering a lot. Why? Because someone has taken away his toy. Now I'm trying to bring in an example which we all can relate. So if suppose we look at a child, and that's a very common example, the child, most of the childs are there, what their problem is, somebody takes away their toy. This is easy for any of us to understand. So the child is going through deep suffering here because someone has taken away the toy. So what does the toy represent here? The toy is the content that I was talking about. I just now mentioned that there are twofold conditioning, as the slide shows here. The first part is content. So I'm trying to show you the example. In the case of a child who is really crying a lot and suffering, what is the content here? The content is the toy. Now this content is interchangeable with any other content. It can be a toy, it can be an object. The content you identify, which is conditioned by your environment, your upbringing, and your surrounding. So in the case of a child, it could be a simple toy. So whether the child is rich or poor, it does not matter. So if the child is poor, then the toy could be a wooden toy. But if the same thing in a rich child, what you can see, a sophisticated, a PS4 and Xbox, the gadget makes no difference as far as the suffering is concerned. Don't you agree with me? Whether it's an electronic toy or it's a wooden toy, the content, no matter what it is, the suffering would still be the same. So that's what I'm trying to explain. The content can be interchangeable, but the suffering will still be the same. The reason why such suffering happens, let's think about it. Why is that much suffering going on in that child? Because underneath, what is that's concealed underneath is the word my. And that is what is structural. So what I'm trying to make you understand is, the child is suffering because underneath his thinking, he has associated that content with the word my. And that, my dear friends, is structural. So I mentioned to you, there is a content, there is a structure. So content is interchangeable. That's what I was trying to tell you. It can be a toy, it can be a BMW car, it can be a nice house, it can be a fantastic dress, doesn't matter. But what is same is the structure. And what's the structure? Structure is that association with word my. Very important to understand the structure. And the unconscious compulsion, we have a compulsion which we are so unconscious of, is to enhance our identity. How do we enhance our identity? Through association with an object, and that's built into the structure of the egoic mind. So that is the problem with the structure, because unconsciously we have a compulsion to associate our identity with the object. And that is the problem with the ego mind, and that is the common structure. My dear friends, as we go along further into the workshop, I'd like to reveal little by little how we get trapped into this association of our identity with objects. And that is the game of ego mind.
So one of the basic mind structures through which the ego comes into identification, into existence is identification. It is so important to understand. One of the main things that ego comes into picture is through identification. So what is identification? You know where the word has come from, the identification? It's a Latin word and it's made of two words. So let's look at this word, identification. What is it made of? It's made of the word idem, which means same. And the second word is farse, which is to make. So when we are identifying with something, you are making it the same. Making it the same as what? Making it the same as I. So everything that you look at, you're trying to make that as you. In other words, you're trying to make an association of every object that you want, a link between your identity and that object. So that's what you keep doing it. So that becomes your identity. So every time you start doing this connection of your identity with the object becomes part of your identity. So if someone takes away the object, you feel that your identity has been stolen. And that's where the suffering is coming from, my dear friends. It's very important to understand. So one of the basic levels of identification is with things. That's where it starts from. Even before we go into the emotional level, the basic level is physical level. At physical level, the ego, basic operation of ego mind starts with identification with things. So the suffering that started when somebody took away our toy when we were a child, it later becomes my car, my house, my clothes, and then you can just keep listing so on, and you try to find yourself in things through this problem. You're trying to find yourself through things, you know, through cars, through houses, but you can never make it. We're going to talk about it, why you can never find yourself in things. So what happens ultimately? You end up losing yourself in those objects, and that is the fate of ego. So what happens, my dear friends, is you are trying to find yourself in things because that's what ego makes you do, but you can never find yourself in them, and so you end up losing in them. You never find satisfaction, and that's the fate of the ego. So you get lost. That's the game of the ego. It's not about me. It's not about my next door neighbor. This is the universal law of ego. So important to understand where it's all starting from. So you remember the people in the advertisement industry, they know very well that in order, if they have to sell anything that people don't really need, that's what the advertisement industries do. They try to sell us things that, you know, we don't even need. They have to convince us that whatever they're trying to sell, that will add something to how we see ourselves or are seen by others, isn't it? So if they can make us, or if they can convince us that what they are selling will make us look good either in our eyes or in the eyes of our friends, so what will happen because of that? They are trying to say that they are adding something to our sense of self. Didn't I say in my slide that ego is nothing but sense of self? And that's what the advertising agencies and advertisement markets are making you. So they are very clever. They have done a research in ego mind, and they know how human mind, ego mind operates. And by using that principle of ego mind, they're trying to sell us things that we don't want, just by making us feel that that object enhances our identity. So they do this, for example, by telling us that we will stand out from the crowd by using this tie or by using this beautiful dress. Or sometimes, you know what they do? They create an association in our mind between that particular product and a famous celebrity. You know, don't they do? If you wear this, you know, you look like, you know, some film star or something like that. And so what are they trying to do? They're trying to make us feel that they're enhancing our identity. So sometimes we see pictures of, you know, old or deceased celebrities in their prime work. You know, they will use photos and stuff, and they will say, see how good they look. And the unspoken assumption is that by buying that product, by some magical act of appropriation, we don't even know, what kind of appropriation that's going to happen, we will become like them, or rather the surface image of us will change. So what is that is basically happening? So you're not buying a product here, you're buying an identity enhancer. That is the problem, my dear friends, which we don't realize, but the advertising, the marketing guys, they have really made good use of. So, it is very paradoxical. What keeps the so-called consumer society going is just the fact that, we are trying to find ourselves through things, and that doesn't work, my dear friends. The ego satisfaction is very short-lived. And so what happens? We keep looking for more, and we keep buying and consuming. But the problem is, no matter what we consume, no matter what we try to look at, we will not find ourselves in them and we get lost. And as I said, that is the fate of ego mind. And this goes on as long as this thinking pattern is unconscious or you are not aware of it. I will keep on saying that because it's very important. Everything that I'm saying about ego only exists as long as you are unconscious about it or you're unaware. When we talk about combating ego, you'll be surprised. The moment you are aware of it, how quickly the veil drops. But till that point of time, remember, all that we are discussing is not a story about anyone else. This is your story. This is my story. This is every human being's story. And this is that Maya. This is the delusion that we get trapped again and again and again. I might have done this workshop multiple times. Doesn't mean that, I'm 100% all the time aware of it. I get trapped into it all the time myself. But I do realize that the moment I get aware of it, I've got the jigs of it. So we have a hope. But first we need to understand what we are talking about. Now, we need to talk a little bit more about ego because the way ego functions. So in my last slide, I told you the key structures of ego. It's the two important aspects of ego, the content and the structure. The content is interchangeable, doesn't matter what it is. But the structure is that is constant, that is the same, and that is the identification with self, never to forget. So as we look at ego, excuse me, I've started this slide with something very important that's touched my heart. So we always talked about how to seek happiness. And that's why I wanted to bring here, unhappiness is an ego-created mental emotional disease that has reached epidemic proportions. It is an inner equivalent of environmental pollution of our planet. We're all so aware of environmental pollution. We want to clean this planet. We want to make it green and clean because we can see it with our physical eyes. But my dear friends, what about that epidemic of unhappiness that we have all created within ourselves, which is one of the greatest emotional disease that's creating havoc in us? The anxieties, the depressions, the suicide attempts, they're all as a result of this. Hence, I thought I would start the slide with this particular line, which really makes so much sense. We give so much importance to keep our environment clean. How little do we think to keep our inner environment healthy or inner environmental clean? So let's understand what are the things that are really adding to this pollution of inner environment. So I've got multiple things on this slide and I'm trying to talk about it little by little so that you understand how we get trapped into this ego mind. So to own something. So when we say ownership means what? To own something. What does it really mean? So when we say something is mine, I'm just trying to take it a little bit further and understand what does that mean, mine. So if someone stands on the street of a New York City, so let's talk about an example, and he's pointing to a huge, multi-storied, huge skyscraper, and if he says that building is mine, I own it, then either he's very wealthy, or you can call he's delusional or a liar. In either case, like either he calls himself, he's a liar or a wealthy person, doesn't matter. In either case, basically that person is telling you a story in which his thought form I and the thought form of the building, they're merging into one. That is what our story of ownership is. Whenever we think we own something, what are we trying to do? We are merging two mental pictures together. The mental picture of us and the mental picture of that object. That's all the story of ownership is, my dear friends. You know why? After my workshop, you can do all these experiments and see how true they are. That's how the mental concept of ownership works. And if everybody agrees with your story when you're pointing towards a skyscraper and saying that you own it, then what happens normally in the day-to-day world? There'll be pieces of agreement papers, you'll sign it, and then the building belongs to you, and you're wealthy. But if nobody agrees to your story, then what happens? They will send you to a mental hospital. There's not much difference, isn't it? In either cases, both are saying that building belongs to me, isn't it? So just try to understand that the whole game of ownership that we play through our life, what is it? And that's why I was kind of throwing this example. So it is important to recognize here in what I have explained you, that the thought form that make up the story. Whether people agree it with or not has absolutely nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter if people agree or not, but it is the whole story that you make up in your mind saying, yes, I paid so many dollars and I got this paper and this belongs to me. And even if people agree with it, even if everything is okay and people say, yes, it belongs to it, honestly, if you look at it, it's only a fiction. It's only a paper transfer, isn't it? The building hasn't moved into you, or you haven't moved into the walls of the building. So many people don't realize until they are on their deathbed. Honestly, my dear friends, until we are on the deathbed, many of us don't realize, and everything external just falls away, that nothing ever had anything to do with who they are or who you are, Till that point, we are all thinking that our identity comes with what we own. But this happens only till we reach our deathbed. For most of us, when you are on your deathbed, you realize that nothing that you own really, is connected to who you are. And in the proximity of death, the whole concept of ownership, it stands, it's revealed, it's meaningless in the last moments of people's life, because that's where the true living happens. People also realize that, while they were looking for something throughout their life, that's when it hits us that all through my life I was looking for something for what? For a sense of self. That's what it is. You don't want to own anything. Owning word doesn't mean anything. All throughout your life you're looking, you want to look yourself through something. That's all it is. For a more complete sense of your own self, what you're really looking for, that being has always been there within you. But why you couldn't see it? Because that's obscured by the identification with things, which ultimately means identification with your mind. So only at the deathbed, some of us realize that things that you were looking for all throughout your life to make a complete sense of self really had nothing to do with your ownership of things or your connection with owning things. It has always been there with you. But why you cannot see it? Because of your identification with things. And why this identification happens, we covered in the last slide. That is the ego mind. And I clearly mentioned, ego has got three characteristics. Sense of self. It will try to connect the content with the structure, and the structure is I, sense of self, which is not true. And that's why at the deathbed, everything falls apart and the truth is staring at your face. And you think the whole life you've been running after things to make yourself complete. But you have always been complete. But why you couldn't see that? Because of ego-minded thinking. That is what obscures your whole being. So that's the first part I wanted to kind of bring it bring it forward is the illusion of ownership. So that it's so important to understand that we all say, I own the house, I own so many houses. My dear friends, yes, people around you, they might be believing that, yes, you believe you own things, but this is the story of ownership. It doesn't really make it is just a fiction in our mind. And you might be thinking, what rubbish is she talking about? Yes, I definitely own this. But think about a little more. After you pass away, someone else will own the same thing. What has changed? Nothing. It's just a thought form in your mind, isn't it? Somebody has the same thought form, so he thinks he owns that thing. If it is just the game of thought form, then that is where you should realize that ego mind has come into picture. Ego plays game with your mind, and that's why we're talking about ego mind. The second one I wanted to mention about, how the ego thinking happens, the need for more. That's what, in this slide I'm trying to show. It's not only the ownership illusion, but there's always constant, the ego identifies with having. It always wants to have. No matter what you give, it's not going to satisfy. So you think it's going to satisfy, but the story is the ego is always identified with having, but its satisfaction is very shallow and very short-lived. You cannot satisfy it. Whenever you say, if I have this, I will be happy. But think about it, when you have that thing, it's only a matter of months, maybe years, and then enough. The ego has gone out of that object. Now the ego wants something else, because the ego cannot satisfy you. You cannot find yourself in that thing. So concealed within it remains a deep sense of dissatisfaction, of incompleteness. So that is in the structure of ego. The structure of ego itself, it always says that I do not have enough. That is the basic structure of the ego. I don't have enough yet, by which the ego really means. So what is the ego saying? What is it really meaning? It's saying, I am not enough. Ego itself is not enough. So it can never make you satisfied with whatever you have. And that's why, my dear friends, we are running, and that running race never stops. As we have seen, having the concept of ownership that I was talking to you, it's a fiction created by the ego to give itself some kind of a permanency. We want something to be permanent. If we want to stand out, we want ourselves to feel special. Since we cannot find ourselves through having, however, there's another powerful drive. What is the drive underneath it? That is the structure of the ego, is need for more or wanting. So when I said one of the problems that we have, the structure of the ego says that, I want more, because it's not satisfied with something. So it's all about having. So now I'm saying the ego structure itself is wanting more, the need for more. No ego can last for long without the need for more. So for example, giving an example, many people say, oh, if I have a BMW car, I'll feel good. And when they have one car, you think that makes them satisfied. Now they want another one. Maybe not the BMW, now they want something different. And maybe a bench car. So it is not only having more, but having something different every time. The same thing is not going to satisfy you. This is very important, friends. This is how we are leading our lives. And that's why we are getting trapped again and again. There is no hope of coming out, because we don't understand how the structure and how the pattern is. So the wanting keeps the ego so much alive, more than having. So it doesn't matter what you have. The wanting is that the ego is running after. The ego wants to, the one thing that ego wants is just keep wanting more and more. And so the shallow satisfaction of having is always replaced by more wanting. So this is the psychological need for more. It's an addictive need. So ego is very addictive because it's never satisfied. So in some cases, the psychological need for more or the feeling of not enough is such a characteristic of ego. So you're thinking ego is only physical. Sometimes it also goes into emotional level. Have Have you kind of read or heard about this illness called bulimia, where people want to eat more? So what they do, they have this illness where whatever they eat, they will throw it out, so that they can throw it out and they can eat more. And it's at now this ego is operating at your emotional level. So the sufferers of bulimia, they always want to keep eating. And how can you do that? When you eat something, you can eat only so much. So whatever they eat, they just throw it out, and then they eat more. So my dear friends, no irrespect to people who are suffering through whatever they are, but this is a way to explain how ego is operating at different levels. So most ego, they have conflicting wants. They want different things at different times, and sometimes they won't even know what they want or what they don't want. So they want everything. When we are operating from the ego mind, so whatever you give them, that's not going to make them happy, or whatever you have is not going to make you happy. You're looking for more. But the only thing that we do not want is the present moment. And we'll talk about the present moment, why the ego does not cherish the present moment. Unease, restlessness, boredom, anxiety, dissatisfaction, they're all the results of unfulfilled wanting, because ego will never make you satisfied. You can never find yourself in anything, and that's the nature of ego, dissatisfaction. So when I talked about structure of the ego, wanting is structural. It is a structural. So no amount of content can provide lasting fulfillment as long as the ego's mental structure remains in place. So what I'm trying to say is, as long as the structure of the ego persists, and what is that? Wanting more, trying to have an identification or connection of you with that object, the ego persists, Very, very interesting, my dear friend. This is how the ego operates. The thought forms of me and mine. So whenever you think about me, mine, immediately a picture comes into your mind, or when you think about the words more than. I particularly wrote on this slide these words you have to be very much aware of. Me, mine, more than, I want, I need, I must have, not enough, all these kind of words. They are not the content, they are the structure of the ego. That's how the ego works. And the content is interchangeable. I did mention the content can be anything, but as long as you don't recognize those thought form within yourself, as long as they remain unconscious, very important, you will believe in what they say. You will be condemned to acting as per what? As per your unconscious thoughts, because you behave like you're possessed by those thoughts. That's how people act when they're possessed by something. Because when those thought forms operate, no possession, no place, no person or condition can ever satisfy you. No matter what the content is, the content can never satisfy you. As long as the egoic structure remains in place, no matter what you have or get, you would not be happy. So you think you'll be happy with it, but you will not be happy, my dear friends. That's the problem of the ego. Now, another important thing of the ego is, as I said, is identification. And now what I want to bring in front of you is identification with body. What has ego got to do with identification with body? Apart from objects, this is another basic form of identification is physical appearance. And this is going on like an epidemic within most of us. The physical appearance of the body that contribute greatly to the sense of what we think we are. Our strength, our weakness. We think we are that. We are the physical appearance. Our physical strength and our weakness, our perceived beauty or ugliness or whatever it is. And that is another way of identification with the body that ego, mind controls. This is how things happen. For many people, their sense of self-worth is bound up with their physical strength, good looks, how they look, how they appear. Many feel that they have a diminished sense of self-worth because they perceive themselves ugly or imperfect. This is all the game of ego, my dear friends. So we think, what can ego do? But ego can play havoc. Ego can really play havoc within us, and we wouldn't even know how things are happening. So ego is always identification with form. As I said before, you're trying to seek yourself in things and thereby losing yourself in some form. Doesn't matter which form it is. In some form or the other, that's the structure of the ego. So forms are just not material objects and physical bodies, more fundamental than external forms, more than things and bodies. The thought forms that they continuously, it's the thought forms, nothing to do with the object. You might have even lost the object, but it's the thought form that's continuously arising in your consciousness. That is the most important thing. They are the energy formations. We know what thoughts are. They are the energy formations. And this is how they keep controlling our mind. So what you may be aware is a voice in your head that never stops speaking. That's exactly what I mentioned. It's that stream of, constant compulsive thinking. When every thought absorbs your attention completely, you're so identified with the voice in your head and the emotions that accompany that thought that you lose yourself in every thought and every emotion, because you think that you are totally identified with that thought form. And that's when you are in total grip of that ego. You think that every thought form that comes in your mind is you. That is what you truly are. You lose your identity. So it's very important, this one, to understand. So ego is a combination of recurring thought forms, and it's so conditioned emotional mental patterns. And one basic structure behind all that is I. It's the non-stop of that I that continues to keep swallowing you. So you have no sense of yourself except the thought forms that are raising in your being, because you're connected to the object or you're compelled with some ownership or the other. Now, what is the other nature of ego? Complaining and resentment. Complaining is one of the ego's favorite strategy for strengthening itself. That's how it strengthens. Every complaint it's a little story in the mind which you make up and you completely believe in it. Whether you complain outside or you just complain in the mind, doesn't matter. But complaint is still a complaint. Ego always complains. Some egos that, they don't have much else to identify, they will complain, because they don't have many objects to connect, because that's the nature of the ego. Even that's some form of a complaint. It becomes so habitual that when you're in a grip of an ego, complaining especially about other people is so habitual. And as I have reminded every time, it's unconscious, which means you do not know that you are doing it. So you, deep down, you're thinking you are the one who is doing it, but you really do not know. So it's sometimes we think, why, how difficult is being aware of this ego mind? But my dear friends, when we start looking at ourselves, our life stories, it's so common. When you are aware, you think, oh my God, I can really overcome it so quickly. But falling into the trap happens within no seconds. So as I said, complaining is one of the nature of the ego, and also is resentment. So what is resentment? So resentment is that emotion that goes with complaining. It's that mental labeling of the people, how we label the people that, I'll give you a few examples. It makes you feel so bitter, indignant, and you're so offended by people. How you say, I hate them because they're so greedy. This is all resentment. You resent other people's greed, their dishonesty, you say their lack of integrity, what they're doing, what they did in the past, everything. This is the story of the ego. It builds, it makes you feel good, saying, oh, you are the poor thing. The whole world is kind of ganging against you. They're scheming up. The ego loves it. The ego loves resenting others. So instead of overlooking unconsciousness in others, you make it into their identity. So when you are in the ego space, you don't realize that the other person, he also could be trapped in that unconscious nature, because you yourself are unconsciousness, and that's why you have got that complaining and resentment. So the unconsciousness in you is that ego. Sometimes the fault that you perceive in others is not there at all. It's just a total misinterpretation. Why? Because it could be a projection by your mind. It's a conditioned thought by your past. And at other times, they may be at fault, the others may be at fault, you know, but when you are totally taken by the ego mind, the little faults, they are amplified and they become so big. That's the story the ego mind makes up. It takes a small thing and it builds a big story around it. And what you react to in another, you strengthen in yourself. I've always said that in my earlier workshop. When you're trying to find fault in someone, there is something there deep within yourself that you resent and you just project it to others. So that's why when you react to something in others, or when you're resenting something in others, remember you're strengthening it in your own self. And most of the time we don't think it works like that. The ego loves to complain and feel resentful, not only about other people. It's just not about people alone, but also about situations. Even about situations, what you can do to a person, you can do to a situation. You can make it your enemy. You can make it your enemy. Like you can say, oh, I don't like the month of July because this is what has happened. July has not done anything. It is your reaction to July or the weather that may be causing problem. But this is how the ego mind operates. So even situations you start hating, and the implication is always like, this should not be happening. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be doing this. I'm being treated unfairly. This is how the ego mind talk about. I'm being treated unfairly. And the ego's greatest enemy of all the time is the present moment, which is to say itself. What is present moment? Is what's happening at that current moment. And that's its greatest enemy. And that's why ego will make sure that the person is always trapped into thought forms. And there is an identification happening all the time. And one of the important things about ego, it is pathological. So let's understand, what does pathological mean? Because if you need to understand, the suffering is coming from, because the word ego has got pathological type of nature. So when you look at this word pathological, where did the word come from? It's a Greek word, and this word comes from the word pathos. So that is the word the pathological word comes from. Pathological, where is the word used for? This word is normally used to describe a condition of the disease, and as I said, it's come from the word pathos, and pathos means suffering. So this word is, the ego is very pathological. So what I'm trying to say here is, when I say pathological, means it creates lot of suffering. That is what it means. A person in the grip of ego, he does not even recognize the suffering as suffering. They won't know that they're suffering. But they think, when they are captured by ego, they think that's the only appropriate way of living. So the ego in its blindness is incapable of seeing the suffering. So it is inflicting suffering upon us, but we are not in a position to see that. And hence, that is where the unhappiness is coming from the suffering. So when I showed you the last slide, I talked about unhappiness, and that's where this unhappiness is coming from the suffering. So unhappiness is an ego-created mental emotional disease that has reached epidemic proportions. And as I said before, it is the inner equivalent of the environmental pollution on our planet. So negative states, what are the negative states? Such as anger, anxiety, hatred, resentment, discontent, not having satisfaction, envious, being jealousy. They are not recognized as negative in the ego mind person. They won't see it as negative traits. Instead, totally justified. And they think, no, I'm totally justified. And or further, they're all misperceptions. And who is creating that? It's all creating by that ego mind, and they're so justified in our mind. And the way we talk when we are in the grip of ego is, I'm holding you responsible for my pain. So you're suffering, but you want someone else to be responsible for it. This is what, by implication, the ego is saying. Basically, it's saying like, nothing is my fault, I'm the poor thing. That's what the ego wants us to think, to be helpless. Ego doesn't like us saying, I'm in charge of my situation, I can take care of my. Ego hates it. Ego doesn't want that. The ego cannot distinguish between a situation or, or reaction to the situation, how we react to the situation. So when you, as I said before, when you look at the day and say, what a dreadful day, what has the day done to us? Nothing. It's like any other day. So it could be cold, it could be windy, it could be rainy, or whatever condition. What is dreadful is not the day, it's our reaction to it. And this is where reminds us of what Shakespeare wrote. You know what Shakespeare said? He said that there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So Shakespeare very clearly recognized the ego-minded thinking. The way it thinks, the way it labels things, makes it good or bad. What is more is, suffering or negativity is often misperceived by ego as pleasure, because up to a point the ego strengthens itself through that particular suffering. That is the pathetic stage, the negativity, the suffering, even that silently the ego is enjoying. And somebody may say, I don't believe it, I don't enjoy suffering. I know you don't enjoy suffering when you're conscious, but if you're really unconscious of your ego mind, that is what you're enjoying, because that is the basis of which the ego the ego survives. So the another thing that I wanted to mention was about negativity. Negativity is not intelligent. That's not intelligence. It is, but that is the way of ego. Like so many things I mentioned about negativity, the anger, the hatred, and all that, and ego justifies that as, it's okay, that's fine. But we all know that negativity is not the way to live. The ego may be clever, but the ego is not intelligent. It's very important to understand the ego may be clever, but it's not intelligent. What does it mean? A selfish person may be clever. So cleverness pursues small aims. If you're clever, you'll have little aims, little mean aims. But intelligence is not clever, because intelligence sees the larger whole. It is the big good. It is the universal good that intelligence sees, in which all things are connected. So there is a difference between clever and intelligence, and ego is clever but not intelligent. Cleverness is motivated by self-interest. You remember the sense of self that I kept talking about? So the cleverness is motivated by self-interest, and it's extremely short-sighted. That's why it doesn't live long. Like most politicians and business people, we say they're clever, but very few are intelligent, because whatever is attained through cleverness is always short-lived and always turns out to be self-defeating. And we always have to remember that cleverness divides and intelligence includes. That's why I wanted to bring this out more clearly, because ego may be clever, but through cleverness, what is it going to do? Through cleverness, it's only trying to divide us. It's not trying to bring everything together. And that's not the purpose of a human being. We are trying to find the connectedness between all the souls and the source. So we have to be very much aware of this ego mind. And in this slide, which I kind of clicked a little bit earlier, what I wanted to show was, this is how the ego thinking happens. So normally when people talk about, light travels faster than sound. So this is one of the words, which is a fact, isn't it? So on this slide, I've mentioned it in bold: light travels faster than sound. By saying this, not only you are right, but this is right, isn't it? That's the fact. Is there any ego involved in it? Probably not, because you're simply stating it, but you're not identifying with yourself. There's no mental position or, some kind of self-position that you have taken in this. But see how the ego mind can change the same statement. Now, if you do the same statement this way, believe me, I know that light travels faster than sound. Or, why do you never believe me that light travels faster than sound? The moment you add these kind of statements, now a simple statement is now in the service of illusion of ego. Why? Because now it has become personalized, and now I'm taking a mental position saying, why do you never believe me? Remember? Complaining, resentment. And not only that, I feel diminished now because someone refuses to believe me. Because I'm already feeling that there could be somebody who may not believe this. And so what happens if somebody doesn't believe me? Because my sense of self is attached to the statement, I feel small or diminished if someone refuses to believe me. See how the ego mind is playing game? Ego takes everything personally. Emotions arise, defensiveness is perhaps even aggression to the other extent. So ego plays a game in our mind. See, I'm trying to show you how a normal statement can be changed into a ego-driven statement. Even ego confuses opinions and viewpoints as facts. Now, in that second statement that I said, believe me, or why do you never believe me? From a fact, I have changed it to a viewpoint now. We have to be aware of that. Hence, only through awareness, not through thinking, can you differentiate facts from opinions. You think, if you think in your mind that by thinking and analysis you can do it, again you're wrapping yourself up in the ego-minded thinking. The moment you become aware and you try to look at both the statement and you see, yeah, first one was just a fact. Why do I have to add that believe me, or why do you never believe me? Of course it's an opinion. So only through awareness that we can differentiate between facts and opinions. But my dear friends, if I've just given you example, but if you start looking into your lives, this is how our lives are. We're changing facts into opinions, and we are taking things so personally. Now, so last few slides, I gave you enough examples and enough ways to tell you the characteristics of ego and how ego is operating. How can you identify ego? Because in my 2 slides back, I gave you a list of things which says, illusion of ownership, complaining, resentment, the kind of words we are using, me, mine, more than, not enough, and then, always trying to have more, and all that negative thinking, the suffering. So all that stuff that we talked about are the characteristics of ego. This is how ego operates within us. So we have talked enough about ego. If we are aware of it and we realize that, so now let's talk about how can we stay away from it, or when it's operating, how can we come out of its grasp. So the next few pages, my dear friends, we're going to talk about, next few slides that I have. I tried to put together what are the things that we should be aware of while we are trying to combat ego. What is combating ego? Combating means when you're fighting ego. It's pretty important. When I started this workshop, I told you about words, didn't I? I said, any object we see, we come up with a word, and that's where we stop thinking about it. And I did talk about vowels and consonants, and I said, yes, to connect to our human minds, we have given a name and a label to every object that we can think of. But I also said that can just a combination of sounds explain who you are and your purpose in the universe. I did mention that, didn't I? So coming back from again to that point, what I'm trying to say is, when you don't cover up the world with words and labels, a sense of the miraculous nature to your life that was lost a long time ago, when humanity, instead of using thoughts, became possessed by the thought. A depth returns to your life back. This is very important. So when you don't cover up everything, even when it's not required with words and labels, the depth of that object returns back into your life. Things regain their newness, their freshness, and the greatest miracle is the experiencing of the essence, whatever it is, essence of self of that object, which no words, thoughts, or mental blocks or images can explain. For this to happen, we need to disentangle our sense of I, of beingness, from all the things it has mixed up. So this, I love this word, we have to disentangle. What are we trying to disentangle? We have entangled our sense of being with objects, but we cannot find ourselves within those objects. So we have to slowly disentangle. We can't do it with a jerk. We will fall apart. We have to do it very, very carefully. The disentanglement is what this workshop is about, and exactly this workshop is what we are talking about. How we disentangle the sense of self, the sense of the words from its essence. So we have to use words and thoughts. I'm not saying words and thoughts are useless. The humanity cannot exist, especially the current humanity cannot exist the way it is without words and thoughts. But they have their own use, they have their own beauty. But do we need to become imprisoned in them? Use the words for the purpose they are, to identify things or to convey it to people. But we don't have to stop. We don't have to stop living just at the surface of things. We are free to connect to the essence of the objects and the things we are surrounded by. We can live a bit differently. We can go beyond the compulsive thinking that the ego mind is forcing us. It's quite important. Hence we are saying, you need to disentangle your sense of I. What is the sense of I? Your sense of beingness, from all the things it's got mixed up or you're identified with. So what we are basically saying is, you have identified yourself with things and you have got lost. So slowly bring yourself out of those things. If you think, see, imagine what you are so addicted to or you're so attached to, and maybe you can start from that point. If you're very much attached to your house, your disentanglement can start from that. That doesn't mean that you have to disrespect your house or you can just treat it like a trash. Treating is different, but getting lost or getting disentangled into that thought form of house and the thought form your I merging is different. So we all at least should give it a try and start somewhere, isn't it? And the things, this is what, you can value and you can care for your things. We are not against, don't own things. There's nothing wrong in owning things. You can own things, you can value, you can care, but this is more than owning. This is about attachment. This is about attachment to a point that you are getting lost in it. This is when the ego is in its play. It's not the thing you are attached to, it is the thought. So what we are talking about here is the attachment to the thought form of the object. So get it straight. So the ego is not wrong. It's just unconscious. So when you observe the ego in yourself, you're beginning to go beyond it. Very important this one is. So the last two dot points I've got on the slide, they're very important. So let me again start those two again. So we are not against having things or taking care of things. No, you can value and care for things as much as you want. But when you get attached to the things to a point where more than the things, you are attached to the thought form. You have merged yourself with the thought form of that object. That is when you need to be aware. And the last point on this slide, which I'm again repeating, is ego is not wrong. Nothing wrong with ego. It is unconscious. Ego is trying to do everything to survive. That's what the survival is. Any being will try to survive, do everything. But the nature of the ego is unconscious. Whenever you observe the ego in yourself, that is when you're beginning to go beyond it. And that's why I said the moment you're conscious, the moment you're aware, that's it. The first step has already been taken. And don't take the ego too seriously. That is the most important thing. Whenever you detect, whenever you're aware of your ego, the best way of dealing with it is just smile. At times you may even laugh. Why am I saying that, laugh at it? Because who are you fighting? At the end of the day, this is happening in your mind. And if you start suffering whenever you're aware of the ego, oh my God, again I got trapped into ego. You don't want this to be another stressful discussion in your mind. You will be again trapped in that, the voice that goes in here, oh my God, I don't want to be trapped in ego. And you're again trapped in ego. Whenever you're aware of this ego, smile at yourself, take another step and think, wow, pat your back and think, I was successful. I was conscious of my ego thinking. That is the only way that you can get out of this ego, and it becomes a habit for you to keep being aware of ego and being conscious of your unconscious thinking. Very important. What else have we got? Ways of combating ego. So here I'm talking about joy of being. So what is this joy of being? We all know that there is that being that exists in you. You can feel it, you alone can feel it. So when you are trapped in this ego mind and you're unconscious, you are not aware of what's happening. But the moment you are aware and you know that this is not what you are, and you come out of your head, and then you can see that you are different to your thoughts. Those were your thought forms. So being must be felt. Being is not something that you think. So where is the difference? Ego is all about thinking, and being is all about feeling. So that you should know the differentiation between feeling of the being and the thinking of the ego. So it can't be thought. Yeah, the ego doesn't know about it because thought is what it consists of. So easy. If you know this difference, that because the problem, what is the problem of ego? That you're always trying to have a sense of self with things. You're trying to entangle that. And what is the sense of self? Is your being, that you exist. That's the joy of being, which can only be felt. So remember, if you want to know who you are, you can only feel it. But if you're thinking about who you are, that's definitely not who you are. That is the thought dominated by the ego, because ego does not know being. It only knows thinking, because that's what the ego consists of. It consists of thoughts. So whenever the ego seeks and gets attached to a substitute for the beings that it cannot feel, it cannot feel things. So instead, because the ego cannot feel things, it will start thinking. So as I always said, nothing wrong in having things around you, but when you get attached to the thought form, the thought of mine, the thought of me, so that is when you have to be aware that it's the ego mind in play. So when you completely accept a loss, suppose you have lost something, and whenever you completely accept a loss, you go beyond ego, and then you are connected to who you are. Why did I mention about the loss of things? Because many times, when we lose things, we get so agitated. Nothing wrong in going looking for your things. So I'm not saying here that's the only way of getting over it is stop looking for things. Keep doing what you have to do. When we did the karma workshop, doing karma is totally different to what you're being. You have to do your duty. If you have to look for lost things, look for lost things. But it's the agitation that comes along with it, which is ego driven. That's what we are talking about. When you start accepting, saying, yes, I've done everything I can, I can't find it, you go beyond ego, because ego will not accept. Ego will not accept a loss. Like I explained you in the case of the child, what did the child do? When the child lost his or her toy, it was such a big thing for the ego, and that causes suffering. So the only way to get out of this trap of ego is when there is a separation or a loss, if you can accept it, that is going beyond it. Accepting doesn't mean that you stop looking for it. I'm trying to clarify that again. Sometimes you look for things and yet you can't find it. So that suffering, that ego driven suffering, can only come by accepting that it's okay, it's all right, it's only a thing. My being does not come from it. So the ego tends to equate having with being. I have, therefore I am. So it does not know the difference between the two. And the more I have, the more I am. The ego lives through comparison. That's the problem. That's another problem. The ego lives through comparison. How you are seen by others turns into how you see yourself. If everyone lived in a mansion and if everyone was wealthy, then that doesn't serve ego's purpose. And how you are seen by others becomes the mirror that tells you that what you like and what you don't like. So the ego is all about sense of self-worth. So you need others to give you a sense of self. You always want someone to, clap for you and say, yep, that's how you are. And that's why the whole thing is about comparison. So how do you let go of attachment to things? You think, oh my God, now it is about attachment of things. And that's why I mentioned, don't even try it. It's impossible. Attachment to things, they drop away by itself. When do they drop? When you no longer seek to find yourself in them. And that is such a beautiful statement, my dear friends. When you stop seeking yourself in them, the attachment will simply go. So in the meantime, just be aware, just that is how you have, just be aware. Are you being lost in things? Sometimes we don't even know how we are reacting. And that's very important. Trying, when you are upset, when you are anxious, whenever you're attached to things, look at, are you identifying yourself with any object? This is a constant awareness process that should go in your mind. So if you are aware that you're identifying yourself with the thing, understand the identification is no longer total, because I am the awareness that is aware that there is an attachment, and that is the beginning of the transformation. So when that being, when that who you truly are is aware of the attachment, that is where the transformation starts. It's so ironic. With just the awareness coming, the whole game is changing. And that's why I mentioned, when you are aware that you are the awareness that is aware that there is an attachment, the transformation has already started. A very interesting way of getting out of it. And then we talked about body identification in the past. So we talked about body identification is one of the most basic forms of ego. And what do? Trick is to shift our awareness from the external form of our body and thoughts to the feelings of aliveness inside it. So what is that I'm talking about? What I'm talking about is that inner body awareness, which most of the time we are not aware of, my dear friends. So if you're not familiar with the inner body awareness, it's just a small exercise I would like you guys to do, which will help us to get out of our body identification and ego mind at times. So can you people just close your eyes for a minute and just listen to what I'm saying? And this is just a very short exercise. So when you have closed your eyes, just bring all your awareness to your hands. And then as you bring your awareness to your palms, you can feel a sense of livingness, sense of tingling sensation in your palms. And that's that inner awareness, that's the inner being. With open eyes, many times we can't feel what's that inner being. In the beginning, you may not be able to feel anything. But as you keep doing this exercise more and more, closing your eyes and just focusing on your palms, there's always a tingling sensation that happens wherever your attention goes, wherever your awareness goes. You will feel the energy from that part of the body. And that's what is the inner awareness that I'm talking about, the inner body awareness.
So today I won't do this for long, but when you can do it yourself, from hands, you can take it to your legs, you can take it to your head, your awareness, and you can feel your whole body part by part like that. And as you keep doing this exercise, there will come a point where you will be able to be aware of the inner being of your whole body, just not the palms. So you'll be able to do this even with open eyes. But if you're not able to feel your inner being with open eyes, this is a very good exercise by closing your eyes and feeling your inner body. You can open your eyes now. This was just a small example of what you can do to feel your inner being. This is what is called inner awareness. So very important to know what inner awareness feels like, and that's why I asked you to do this exercise. So body awareness, which is inner awareness, not only anchors you in the present moment, but it's a doorway out of the prison. That's the ego. It strengthens your immune system and your body's ability to heal itself. So inner body awareness is beautiful. Inner body is the life energy. It is, as I mentioned, it is the bridge between form and formless. So sometimes when we are trying to meditate, we can feel that vibration inside us, the livingness inside us. Other times when you're not meditating, you can just close your eyes and feel it. And that will bring you to the present moment. So when you're connected to the present moment and you're feeling your body awareness, you will not be in that ego mind space that I was talking about. So as I mentioned, body awareness, it anchors you in the present moment, and it's a doorway out of the prison of ego. And it also it helps you with your self-healing also. And and what I wanted to mention here about the combating of ego was non-reaction. As I mentioned here, non-reaction to the ego in others. So sometimes when we think, the others are not treating us fair, one of the ways, your non-reaction to their ego. And this can only happen when you are aware of your ego. When you are aware of your ego, then you will be aware of the ego in others, and that will help you to be non-reactive towards their ego. But you can only be in a state of non-reaction if you can recognize someone's behavior as coming from the ego. That's so important. You need to understand that they are behaving from the ego. Otherwise, you will not have that compassion for them. And when you realize it's not personal, there is no longer, a compulsion to react. With anything that's not personal, when you understand with kindness that they are ego-driven and that's why they are behaving like that, you have a bit of sympathy and you feel like treating them less harshly. So by not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to get some sanity in your life and get out of this ego behavior. And another word for non-reaction is forgiveness. To forgive, what is forgiving? Forgiving is to overlook or look through. So you look through the ego, to the sanity that is in every human being or his essence. So forgiveness is basically understanding, where the other person is operating from, and then looking beyond the ego and understanding that somewhere they are not able to get the connection between their being and their ego mind. And when you have that understanding, and not only you can excuse yourself, you can forgive yourself, but you can also forgive others too. That is, see, often when we talk about, we think, it's forgiving others. And I always mention, it's not about just forgiving others. Sometimes we have to forgive ourselves, because when you realize that you have been acting from ego mind, you feel so bad, and that awareness comes from. So that forgiveness is for ourselves. It's okay. It's one of the delusions of this human body is ego mind. So when we are in that awareness space, the forgiveness has to happen for us too. So if in the middle of negativity, so when you are just wrapped with the negativity, in the middle of negativity, if you're able to realize that at this moment I'm creating suffering for myself, that is good enough. That is enough for you to raise yourself above the limitations.
of this ego thinking. So it is so easy. Um, that's why I keep on saying it is the awareness. The moment you become conscious of your behavior, you may be surrounded by negativity, but if you're able to realize that at this moment, because of my ego mind, I'm creating suffering for myself, that is the moment that you have made the transformation. It is amazing, my dear friends, but that is how the ego mind can be combated. It's just such a small thing. Um, so I always like to tell this duck story. It's so important because you may not remember this workshop. I always say this. All my workshops are loaded. I come up with so much information, not to confuse you, because this is my passion. Anything that I find useful for me, I want to share with you, because I know we are all the same. And I think if I'm trapped in this, I'm sure, one of you or maybe two of you may be trapped. So I know I come with so many slides, so much information, but this is only my passion. Don't get me wrong. My passion to help you people. You may not remember anything, but you will remember this duck story. So hence I'm sharing with you. I might go 5 or 10 minutes over, but let me finish this off. Now, this duck story is so important. Now, in the normal world, in a pond, when you see two ducks get into a fight. And if you see that carefully, I often go to Gels Park, which is close to my house, and I see there are a lot of ducks in the ponds, and I often see this. When two ducks get into a fight, that fight won't last long. You know what happens? They will separate and float off in opposite direction. There'll be a lot of quacking, quack, 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 quack for maybe a couple of seconds. And you will think, oh my God, they're going to kill each other. But you will be surprised that within seconds, they will separate and they float off in opposite direction. And you know what they do? Because so much energy they have built, because I'm sure their emotions also would have come up, they flap their wings so vigorously that they release all their surplus energy that was built during the fight. So when you throw a piece of bread in the pond, definitely you'll see ducks coming for it, and some duck will grab it, and there'll be a lot of fighting. But it doesn't last long, because those ducks, we think they are not intelligent beings. Those so-called non-intelligent beings know how to survive. They flap their wings vigorously, and that's how they're releasing their surplus energy that was built during the fight. And what do they do after that? After flapping their wings, they will float on peacefully in their life, in the pond, as if nothing happened. And even if the other duck came across, there'll be nothing there. There'll be no emotion, because all that extra emotion has been released immediately. But my dear friends, now I want to extrapolate that a little bit more. If those two ducks had human minds, you know how they would react? This is how they would react. Duck with a human mind. They will keep the fight alive even after the fight is finished, even 2 days later. They will keep the fight alive in their mind by thinking, by story making. You know how we talk? I don't believe. This is the chatter that goes on in our mind after any event. Just see that. I don't believe what he just did. He thinks he owns the pond. He has no consideration for my private space. I will never trust him again. I'm sure he's plotting something against me already. I will teach him a lesson he will never forget. This is, if the duck had human mind, my dear friends, even after 2 days, even after a year, this is how the duck would keep on making stories. The act would be small, but the stories would be big. On and on, the mind spins tales, still thinking about it for days, for months. And as far as the body is concerned, the fight is still going on. Why? Because there is energy generating in response to your thoughts. Because your thoughts are going on, and because of that, your emotions are generating. So you have thoughts that releases more energy, and then you have emotions with the thoughts, which will create more thoughts. So the actual incident is finished, but in your mind, your body, the fight is still going on. And this becomes emotional thinking of the ego, because there is no physical incident there now. See how problematic the duck life would become if it would think like a human being. But unfortunately, this is how we humans live. The mind makes up story, keeps going and going and going. So you know what's the lesson that I have learned from the ducks? Flap your wings. Let go of the story and return to the present moment, because in the present moment, there is nothing happening. Your story happened long time back, but your story is still happening in your mind. My dear friends, if you don't remember anything, just remember one phrase from this workshop: flap your wings and let go. Such an important lesson for human beings through this ducks. So when we are coming to the end of this workshop, anything that we are doing is for happiness, isn't it? So what is the secret to happiness? The ego says, this is the problem. The ego says, maybe at some point in the future, I can be at peace. If this happens, if that happens, or something else happens, or if I get that promotion, if I have 2 beautiful children, or if I get that house, then I will be happy. So what is ego saying basically? Ego is saying I can never be at peace because of some. So the ego is always pushing you into the future, saying you can only be happy in the future. So this is the kind of story. So why cannot we be at peace now? Because the ego doesn't know that your only opportunity for being at peace is now. So what is ego doing? It's saying maybe at some point in the future you can be at peace. And so what you do, you keep listening to the stories of ego saying, and you try to find yourself in things, because that's what the ego is saying. If you find yourself in that, you will be happy. If you find yourself in that, so the whole life you're looking for something. And what you are not looking is, you have to realize that the only opportunity for being at peace is now. Or maybe the ego does not know that is how the ego operates. And maybe it's afraid that if you found this out, that the peace is in now, then that's the end of the ego, isn't it? If really you found out that the peace is in the current moment, that will be the end of the ego. So why would ego want you to be in the present moment? Yeah, isn't that funny? So how to be at peace now? By making peace with the present moment. The present moment is the field on which the game of life is happening. It's not happening in the future. It's not happening in the past. It's happening now. And it cannot happen anywhere else. So here and now is where the life is happening. And once you have made peace with the present moment, see what happens? See what you can do or choose to do. It's your choice. There are 3 words that convey the secret of the art of living. The secret of all success and happiness: to be one with life. Being one with life, being now and here. You then realize that you don't live your life, but the life lives you. Very important to understand that being one with life is being one with now. That is where the life is. And the moment when you are in now, the ego dies. Hence, ego will always keep you away from the present moment. And that is the problem. And though knowing that present moment is answer to everything, we will be trapped in the present moment, because that's the game of ego mind. So this is the last slide, my dear friends. It's very important to understand how we are all carrying the past. And when we talk about carrying the past, I would like to remind you of a story which I'm sure most of you know about. This is about carrying the past. This is about 2 Zen monks who were traveling, and they came to a point where they had to cross a stream. I'm sure most of you would have heard this story, and this is so appropriate to my last slide. And just before they were about to cross the stream, the stream was a little bit deeper, like till the knees, and there was this beautiful woman who had a new kimono she was wearing. She didn't want to spoil that, so she asked for help, if the monks could carry her or help her to go to the other side of the stream. So one of the monks picked her up on his shoulder, and in 5 minutes they crossed the stream, and then he put her down. She thanked him and she went away, and they both kept walking. Every hour the other monk would say to the first monk, our guru will be very unhappy, our master will be very unhappy if he knows that you carried a woman. We Zen monks should not touch women. So he said, that's all right. I did not see her as a woman. I as somebody in need, I helped. That's fine. I will explain to the master. Half an hour later, same question. Another half an hour later, same question. After 5 hours of continuous getting this question, the first monk said, my dear friend. Yes, I carried the woman. I dropped her to the other side of the stream 5 hours back. But you are still carrying that woman even now, 5 hours later. That is so true, my dear friends. I have read this story God knows how many times, because this is how we live our life. So as in the case of monk who carried the burden of his resentment for 5 hours by feeding it with his thoughts, most people, we are carrying a large amount of unnecessary baggage, both mental and emotional, throughout our lives. You know, they limit themselves through grievances, regrets, hostility, guilt. You know, they're limiting themselves. Our emotional thinking has become our self. We think we are our emotional thinking. And so we hang on to the old emotion because it strengthens our identity. We do not want to change, though we are suffering because of that. That has become our identity. So anything that has become our identity, we just hold on to that. So here I am introducing a word that is called pain body. What is a pain body? Pain body is accumulation of old emotional pain. The incident would have happened long time back, but thinking again and again, bringing back the emotions, you torture your being, you suffer. And that suffering is called the pain body. I'm introducing this pain body word early on to everyone because very soon I will be having a workshop on pain body. My dear friends, how this pain body is tearing us apart, that's another topic, but it's very apt to start here. But what I want to mention is, you know, we can break this habit. We can break this habit of this ego mind, this ego thinking. We have learned so many ways in the last few slides how to combat the ego. So because of the human tendency to perpetuate the old emotions, this is our tendency to bring the old emotions back and back and back and back and suffer because of the pain body. And so what we do is, however, we can stop adding to the pain body we already have. So this is basically our choice. We can come out of it. How? By flapping our wings. Remember the duck story that I said? Flap your wings. Whenever you think you are in the past and it's not required, flap your wings. Come out of the mental dwelling in the past, because it's not doing you any good. Nothing ever happened in the past that can prevent you from being in the present now. So we can learn not to keep the situations or events alive in our minds. We can learn to return our attention continuously to the pristine, the timeless present moment, rather than to be caught up in the mental movie making. We are going through the mental movie making. Remember how I told you, if the duck had human minds, this is the movie making. You know, our very presence then becomes our identity rather than our thoughts and emotions. When you are in the ego mind, your identity was your thoughts, your emotions. But when you are in the present moment, that presence of your being itself becomes your identity. And then, as I said before, nothing ever happened in the past that can prevent you from being in the present now. And if the past cannot prevent you from being present now, then what power does it have? So if you can be in the present moment by flapping your wings and coming out of the past, then past does not have any power over you. And the moment past does not have any power over you, you've already broken one of the characteristic of the ego mind, conditioned by the past. Gone the ego mind, and you are released out of the ego mind. So my dear friends, key takeaways: do not fall in the trap of ego mind. Thinking about awareness is the main dilemma of the human existence. Always try to bring yourself in the present moment. This is where the life is happening. Life is not happening in thinking. There is nothing happening here. There is only suffering. Bring thoughts only to the point you need them for a purpose. Then present moment. Always remember your inner environment. Remember, how do you connect to your being? We did that small exercise. Close your eyes and feel the tingling in your hands. Like that, you can feel the tingling in your whole body. Slowly make this as part of your daily practice. That is called the joy of being. That tingleness, that freshness inside you is the joy of being. Life is not as serious as mind makes it to be. So have a smile, have a laugh or two whenever you can. But most importantly, flap your wings, let go of the story and return to the present moment. Thank you very much. I have ran 10 minutes over than what I said, but my dear friends, I could not shortcut it. Thank you very much for your time, and I will hand it over to Shri. More than happy to take question answers. Over to you, Shri.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Very, very, very beautifully explained about this ego mind. Whatever I want to share, you also explained it in the key takeaways. Just I want to express all my feelings, but you already mentioned in the key takeaways. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time, for your effort, for enlightening us. And one more thing I want to say is just if you always feel yes, I did it and I have it. Instead of that, it is done through me. Universe is just doing through me. If you feel that there is no what you call there is no what you call sorry, no ego mind, right? Yeah.
Shri, you have picked such a apt point. I have to comment on it because it's a very important thing that you talked about. So if you don't mind, I will just say a couple of sentences on in just extending that. What Shri just mentioned about universe living through you is a great point. I was holding it because I covered that in my session Karma, which was what goes around comes around, and I'm guilty enough that I haven't done this session with the UK guys, but because Sri, you have mentioned in my Karma session, one of the main discussions we have is how, Karma Yoga. How do we do Karma? And I don't want to jump ahead of your workshop. I know I haven't done it, but what you said is very true. When you do karma, when you lead your life, two things are very important. Very, very important. This is what has been repeatedly covered in Bhagavad Gita or any kind of Vedanta is you cannot escape your karma. Karma means your duty. Karma means the way you live your life. You have to live your life. But then what are the two things that you have to remember is udasinata. I'm talking this word from Sanskrit so that people who go back and read the Sanskrit scriptures can also understand what I'm talking. So the first one is udasinata. When you are doing the karma, you have to do with udasinata. Udasinata means that this job is being done through me by the consciousness. We are all consciousness and we are all connected. So Sri has raised a very good point. Whenever you do a karma, even if you're thinking I did it, it is fine, but as long as you remember you are the consciousness, we are only a channel. We are a channel through which this whole consciousness game is going on. So when you do karma, it's very important to do with udasinata. That means do not take your karma, your karta means the doer, from the ego mind. Why I'm saying is the moment the ego mind comes into picture, that karta, the doer, goes into that I mode, sense of self, conditioned by the past, everything comes into the picture. And what is the second part of the karma, which I should mention is the result. That result also, you cannot be expecting the result when you're doing the job. I know this is not karma session, but because Sri mentioned such a great point that when you're doing the activity, you have to understand that if you do with the understanding that the work is being done by consciousness, then you will not be attached to the result as well. Whatever the result is, good or bad, you get detached, and this is what karma siddhanta, karma yoga is. So these topics are very interrelated, and hence after doing the karma session I decided to do ego mind just because of this. But having said that, we haven't lost anything. We will do the karma siddhanta, karma yoga separately in some session. But thank you so much, Sri, for bringing such great points.
Thank you so much, ma'am, because I'm living this life because I always align with the universe. Things are just done through me. Yeah. Thank you so much for this enlightening session, ma'am. And
Thank you,
friends,
Sri.
please share your feedback. If you have any questions or doubts, please ask, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sarad from UK. Just calling.
Hi, Sharad.
Hi. First of all, great talk. Thank you. I didn't really know where the 2 hours went.
Thank
But I
you.
got a small question actually. The ego word, as such, as we know from the general corporate thingies and whatever we talk about, is basically how headstrong one is, how uncompromising one is, and how strong or superior he or she is, that stops him or her from reaching out to people or compromise. But the way you have described ego here, like wanting more or associating to the need of human beings, are these not more like ambition or akanksha, like like obsession, than ego? If you could throw some light on that, please.
Yeah, good question, Sharad. So the example that you mentioned from the corporate world is about that is only part of the ego that you have explained. Um, how ego can be so aggressive, not be listening to people, comparison. That's only one part of the ego that you mentioned. And in my workshop, I did not take examples of the corporate world, or I did not take examples of the application of ego, because time did not permit me, but you have given a great example of ego. What I tried to cover ego is from complete holistic approach. Ego is just not one in the corporate world alone. Even a person who doesn't work has get trapped in the ego. So we like to relate it to the workplace, because that is where we spend most of our time. And we think the ego exists only in the workplace. Ego exists everywhere, Sharad. Ego exists even in our family. Even if the family is not existing, ego will exist in our mind. Because I'll tell you, when I was going in London, the tube, I was in the train, and I met this lady was there sitting across me, and she was constantly talking, Sharad. There was nobody else there. She was just talking to herself, and in her talk she was getting so agitated, and then she was going low, and then she was going high, and apparently there was university somewhere close, and after a while she got down and she went away. And nobody was willing to sit next to her. She was perfectly okay. She was well dressed and she looked quite educated. And when I asked someone, because they seem to be knowing her very well, that must be a regular commuting path, and they said, "Oh, we don't know. Sometimes she's very quiet, but sometimes whatever goes in her mind, she's talking out." And people who look at her will not say that is ego, because for us, we have framed ego only in certain areas. And the reason I went deeper into ego, and I tried to bring different aspects of ego, is because that woman who was sitting all by herself on the bench in the train was totally in the grip of the ego, because she's not even understanding where the thoughts are coming from. They're so compulsive, they're so repetitive, and she's thinking that's what she is. She's totally possessed. That's an extremity of ego. She's not mental, she's not abnormal. Because I'm sure when she goes back to university, apparently she's a professor, she will be in a total different frame. So answering to the extension part of your question, that mahatwakansha, see, ambition and ego, there are two different things. You can have ambition, but you don't need comparison. In my talk, I clearly mentioned ego cannot survive without comparison, because I don't know if I know I talk a lot, different aspects. At one point I said, if we all live in a mansion, and if we all had enough wealth, ego won't be satisfied. Ego wants something more. Ego wants your identity to feel something different. Ego survives on division. Ego is not about encompassing everybody. Inclusion, compassion, that is not ego. Ego is all about division. So if you have a mahatwakansha, if you have an ambition, that has got nothing to do with anyone. You can operate in your own way. You can have your goals. You don't need to be driven by your involuntary thinking. Ego operates involuntarily, totally unconscious. A Mahatmakanshi person is not unconscious. He knows where he is going. He's always checking, is he practical? Is his goals practical? So that if there are two things, something called pride and ego. Mahatmakansha is more towards pride, which has got no comparison, and it's very conscious. So the main difference comes from being aware and being not aware. That's what I wanted to bring, how unaware behaviors how unconscious behaviors encompass the total ego mind and ego thinking. It's all about comparison. It's all about with respect to others, with respect to others, because the sense of self, it's separation. It does not understand. Ego mind does not want to believe that we are all connected, we are all one, because the game finishes at that point. If the moment the awareness comes that we are all connected, ego cannot survive. That is the problem of the ego. So nothing wrong being Mahatvakanshi, having goals, nothing wrong. But Mahatvakanshi person is not ego minded. He has his own goals for his own purpose, and he keeps checking on them, and he's totally aware of them. Hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, you did actually. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sharad.
Thank you, Saroja madam. It was a wonderful session. And
Hi, Ravi.
Hi, ma'am. Hi. So the main thing I find it is like, the key is identifying the ego. And amongst all the egos, and the spiritual ego is the biggest ego, and the spiritual people, right? So
Ravi, you have mentioned such a valid point. I did not want to raise this, but you know what? Even in the last workshop, someone mentioned, you're 100% right. You're 100% right. I know on this platform, there are great people who are doing so much work on the path of spiritual evolution. I know. But Ravi, you have mentioned a great point. More than any ego, the spiritual ego, very difficult to be aware of.
yeah, very, very difficult to identify. Yes, agreed, ma'am.
Very well said. Very well said.
Yeah. But the great workshop and great session today, ma'am. It's a like a reminder every now and then we have to, participate in this like-minded group, and we grow together.
That is so true. You're 100% right, Ravi. I talk about it all the time. In my bedroom, I have written some charts so that I can remember. In spite of that, it's a trap. Ravi, this is Maya. I mean, I have to tell you, human body coming in this form is a Maya. And we have to be constantly aware. That's why we have picked so like-minded people, so that we can keep reminding each other. That is the purpose of life. Everyone says, what is the purpose of my life? What is the purpose of my life? And these days, like, I don't beat around the bush, Ravi. One main purpose of life is being bound by this human form. Though you feel that you are so limited, when you realize that you are not that limited being, deep inside you are that consciousness which is everywhere prevailing. That is the purpose of life, to know that reality, and yet be aware that you are bound by this human body. So it is going to be a challenge. I'm not saying that just by doing this workshop we will get out of this ego mind, but it is only about the awareness. That is only the purpose of life. We have to be aware. Even if, just for the sake of our discussion, even if Paramatma comes and stands in front of us and he says, you're saying that you are Paramatma, the question is, my answer to him will be, I am Paramatma bound in this human body. So when I'm not bound in this human body, I'm Sarvagya. That means I know everything. I know that what ego mind is what. But when I'm bound in this human body, I am Kinchitagya. Kinchitagya means I'm only aware of some things because of my human nature. And part of that is my ego mind too. So we have to be aware. We have to accept that yes, we can get trapped, but we also have to accept that we have to be aware.
Thank you, ma'am. Very well said. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi. Thanks for attending the workshop.
Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. Sandeep here.
Hi, Sandeep. Long time.
Oh, yeah.
How are you, Sandeep?
Very, very well. Very, very well.
Hey, good to hear you.
Thank you for a wonderful session, ma'am. Really, I understood very, very much about the ego.
Oh, fantastic. You made my day. Thank you.
The inputs from Sri and inputs from Rami and valuable inputs from you as well. I understood very much. Good to have ego, but we need to be aware of what is ego and what we are talking. When you use the words like self, myself, I did this, or I did this, or myself did this, and instead of using these words, it's compulsory in the especially the Saurabh mentioning about, Sharad mentioning about the corporate world, we have to use these words continuously when you, and we need to respond to some people or some person. Yes, I did this job. It has to use that. But with this session, I understood we need to be aware when you're saying I did, but it is not you did. It's somebody. The energy is making you to do this job. So I really happy and I really understood the session. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much. So good to hear from you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Just to add to Sandeep's point, and you rightly pointed out, Sandeep, in our corporate world. But believe me, I mean, after coming into meditation, even though, we are a team, right? So for some reason, I started feeling to put instead of I, we. Every time I send an email, I say, oh, we kind of, we feel that, we believe this is right. Instead of I believe, somehow it just started coming up automatically. So maybe, so I didn't feel like
yes,
so that is
exactly.
happening. Yeah,
exactly because I generally use those words, we did it, or we did it as a team. I always with the we word. But what I noticed is some people doesn't like we. Actually, if you did it, just why don't you say you did it?
exactly. Yeah,
I generally like of using we. Actually, as a team, we're a team. I like to use we everything. I like we do it, we will do it, we will do it, we will do it. We can respond to that email. I've seen a couple of people. Are you don't say we. Are you going to do that, or tell the name? I've seen that a couple of people coming
agreed.
straight away.
Yeah.
Don't say we. If you want to do it, just do it, or don't say we. I'm not going to do it. So,
It's such a good discussion. Yeah, great, Sandeep and Ravi.
Yeah, agreed. And the thing is, sometimes because of we unable to identify the ego, and as I said, is amongst everything, the spiritual ego is the one we hurt people, and we don't even know that we have hurt them, right? Because we think we have done it right, and we think we have done the good thing, but it's a as ma'am said, so it's a daily awareness activity that we have to do. And
don't get lost in things. That's what it is. Like, we identify ourselves with objects so much that sometimes we lose our own identity. That's one thing. Because I remember there used to be this, I have shared this in the last workshop also, this woman who was had cancer. In her last days, like, this guy was going to counsel her because cancer pretty painful and she knows she's going to pass away. And then every day this guy used to go and counsel her. And then I think one day when he went for counseling, the lady was so upset. And what happened? Oh, I can't find my diamond ring. My caretaker must have taken it away. She's